Anna had always known her place in the family was precarious. Growing up in the historic neighborhoods of Providence, Rhode Island, she occupied a silent, invisible corner of a household that had already written its script. Her older brother Mark was the star, the one their parents called the future of the family since middle school. He brought home trophies from business camps, organized school fundraisers, and spoke confidently at the dinner table about stock trends before he was even 15. Their mother described him as born for leadership, and their father used him as a benchmark for all discussions of success. Ellie, the youngest, had a different role: muse and miracle. Her sketches covered the refrigerator door, her ballet recitals filled the weekends, and her slightest emotional outburst was treated with deep family concern. When she announced her desire to attend an arts conservatory, their mother called it a divine calling and offered to co-sign the loan. Everything about Ellie was tenderly amplified, painted in soft, glowing tones, while Anna stood in the background, unremarked and largely unmissed. Anna, the middle child, drifted between expectations that never fit. Her fascination with colors, shape, and visual narrative was first regarded as a phase, then tolerated, and eventually dismissed. Her university degree in illustration was met with tight smiles. Her freelance projects were called cute distractions. When she was commissioned for a book cover by a local author, no one mentioned it at dinner. And when she offered to design the poster for Ellie's art show, it was accepted, used, and later cropped without credit. After her marriage dissolved, an unraveling met with mild concern and quickly buried under other family matters, Anna moved into her late grandmother's old apartment. It was a modest space above a shuttered bakery, but it gave her solitude and light and the quiet she needed to work. Her grandmother had adored her in her own reserved way, and the apartment felt like the only place that had ever been given without strings. Still, even this decision became ammunition. Her mother referred to it as Anna's vanishing act, and Mark once joked that Anna only chose situations where she didn't have to compete. What finally fractured her last thread of tolerance came not from a dramatic insult, but from exclusion so precise it could only be deliberate. Mark had recently won an East Coast Investment Prize, a recognition celebrated in business journals and local media alike. The family organized a dinner in his honor, private, elegant, filled with old family friends and catered details. Anna found out about it from a photo her cousin posted online. Everyone was there: her parents, Ellie with her fiancé, Mark flanked by executives and relatives. The caption read, "A night for the real stars of the family." She wasn't even mentioned. Alone in her apartment, with only the hum of her old radiator and a watercolor sketch drying on the table, Anna felt the usual ache of being unwanted harden into something else, something colder, something useful. She had no seat at the table, but she finally realized she didn't need one to flip it over. That night, she opened her laptop and began researching. Not illustration clients, not art supplies. She searched lottery ticket templates, social experiments, and how to create a hoax so believable it would pull even the closest people apart. Her plan was not about money. It was about a mirror, and she was about to hold it up. Anna's plan began not with a scream, but with a whisper, a digital whisper. She spent a full weekend researching official lottery layouts, past winning tickets, and the nuances of security markers and fonts. The more she studied, the more precise her plan became. It wasn't enough for the fake ticket to look real. It had to feel real. Every curve of the barcode, every smudge of ink, every legally phrased disclaimer at the bottom needed to mirror authenticity. She downloaded sample tickets from various states, studied news articles featuring real winners, and found a high-resolution Photoshop template on a dark corner of the internet. Then, with meticulous care, she edited in the winning numbers from a recent multi-million-dollar jackpot, one large enough to stir awe, but not so absurd as to draw media attention too early. She chose a draw from 3 days earlier, when the prize had been listed at $11.7 million. The timing was key. close enough to feel fresh, but distant enough for people to believe she had sat on the secret, overwhelmed and uncertain. Anna printed the ticket on thick stock paper using a borrowed inkjet printer from the neighborhood library. Once satisfied with the creases, the texture, and the gentle wear around the edges, she placed it in a glass bowl on her desk, letting it catch the light. That evening, she logged into her social media for the first time in weeks. Her first post was vague, a simple sentence that hinted at a life-altering shift. Some days, everything changes in the blink of an eye. There were no hashtags, no emojis, just enough to stir curiosity. Then, an hour later, she added a photo of a champagne flute next to the lottery ticket, blurred just enough to tease the numbers. The caption read, "I think I need to sit down." The messages started to pour in. At first, friends, curious, thrilled, suspicious. Then, acquaintances she hadn't heard from in years. Old classmates, art school contacts, a guy she dated once in her 20s. By morning, she woke up to 63 unread messages and a wall of comments. But the centerpiece of her performance came the next afternoon. She took a well-lit photo of the fake ticket, crisp and close-up, with the numbers clearly visible. The caption was simple, almost innocent. So, what now? That post went viral within her small digital orbit. People zoomed in, screenshotted it, cross-referenced the numbers with official results. The draw date matched. The amount matched. Everything aligned perfectly. It was a lie built on the backbone of truth, and it worked. Her phone buzzed constantly. First, it was her high school best friend, whom she hadn't spoken to since the wedding. Then, an uncle from New Hampshire, who once called her a soft city girl. An hour later, her cousin messaged her a long paragraph about how they had always felt close, how they'd love to reconnect. Anna responded with carefully measured warmth, hinting at disbelief and nerves, never quite confirming anything. Then came the call that gave her chills. Her mother's name appeared on the screen. The woman who hadn't spoken to her since Thanksgiving, who ignored the emails about the gallery exhibit Anna curated last spring, was suddenly calling her twice in 1 hour. She didn't answer the first time. The second time, she let it ring, waited, then replied with a simple text. "Busy. We'll call later." 2 minutes passed before her father tried calling too. His voicemail was hesitant, more awkward than she remembered. It ended with a familiar phrase from her childhood. "Call us, sweetheart. We're thinking of you." She placed her phone face down on the table and sat in silence, letting the room absorb the weight of what she had done. For the first time in years, she felt them pulling toward her, not out of love or remorse, but because she had suddenly become valuable, not as a daughter or an artist, but as a potential millionaire. Anna smiled to herself, not out of triumph, but out of quiet confirmation. The game had begun. A week after the supposed lottery win, Anna's modest apartment underwent a transformation. The usually quiet space, filled with brushes, canvases, and the soft hum of jazz from her old speaker, was suddenly alive with voices, footsteps, and forced laughter. Her family, once distant and indifferent, now converged like bees to honey. Her mother arrived first, holding a store-bought cake decorated with scripted icing that read, "So proud of you," as if affection could be conjured with a few sugary words. She kissed Anna on the cheek too quickly, her eyes already scanning the apartment, mentally measuring the walls, the furniture, the floor plan. She commented on the decor, praised the layout, and offered unsolicited advice about upgrading the kitchen. Her father came next, a man known more for his silence than engagement, but now he spoke with a strange eagerness, carrying a leather portfolio under his arm and a practiced expression of paternal wisdom. He offered to help Anna sort through the next steps, referencing investments, capital gains, and asset diversification with a familiarity that suggested he had already envisioned himself in the center of her financial affairs. He brought up a friend from his tennis club who handled large windfalls for clients and would be happy to give advice. Mark followed, arriving with the confidence of someone who believed he belonged in any room. He wore a tailored blazer and greeted Anna with exaggerated warmth. As they sat down, he casually scrolled through his phone, then handed her a contact card. It belonged to his financial advisor, a man who, according to Mark, had helped him triple his real estate assets in 2 years. He spoke about wealth management as if Anna were a junior employee in need of guidance. Every sentence came with a soft undertone of superiority, a carefully veiled condescension masked as brotherly concern. Ellie came last, balancing a tote bag, a restless child, and a visibly curated narrative of struggle. She sighed often, glanced meaningfully at Anna, and described the mounting expenses of her daughter's art school. She talked about the rising tuition, the unpaid internship she had just turned down, and the dream of someday owning a small studio. Her voice quivered in just the right places. She didn't ask directly, but every word was shaped to draw empathy, and perhaps a portion of the fictional millions. Anna moved through the room gracefully, as if hosting a celebration she hadn't planned. She wore a soft sweater, understated jewelry, and a notebook that became her prop for the evening. She asked questions with deliberate innocence. She inquired about tax shelters, charitable donations, and real estate. She posed hypotheticals. If you had to choose between a trust or a foundation, which would you pick? If you could invest in a dream project, what would it be? She nodded at their answers, underlined their ideas, smiled with practiced gratitude. She made one phrase her refrain, repeated with soft humility that felt too genuine to question. She said she wanted to be fair. She didn't want to make hasty decisions. She hoped to include everyone. The word everyone hung in the air like incense, masking the rot underneath. They all agreed. They all smiled. They all congratulated her again and again. But behind their compliments, their posture, their polished advice, their eyes betrayed them. They watched her closely, too closely. Every flick of her pen, every pause before a question, every polite laugh was dissected. They were no longer simply family. They were contenders in a game she had quietly orchestrated. Later that night, when the dishes had been washed and the last goodbye exchanged, Anna sat at the kitchen table in silence. Her notes from the evening lay open in front of her, not just numbers and names, but tallies of behavior. Who asked what? Who hinted first? Who avoided eye contact when fairness was mentioned? It had been a performance on all sides, but only one of them had known it was theater. The days that followed blurred into a carefully orchestrated circus of suggestion, persuasion, and thinly veiled manipulation. The first move came from her mother, packaged neatly in a formal PDF document titled Initial Family Allocation Proposal. The file included color-coded charts, percentages, and footnotes referencing supposed past verbal agreements. 30% was to be allocated to shared family property needs, a vague term that conveniently included home renovations her parents had been postponing for years. 20% was reserved for Ellie's daughter's education, under the justification of nurturing the next generation. 10% was to be considered a strategic injection into Mark's business ventures. The remaining 40%, labeled as discretionary, was what her mother believed Anna could keep. Her mother framed the document as a logical and loving way to preserve balance. The email accompanying it praised Anna for her maturity and included a passive-aggressive reminder about the value of family unity in times of transition. Anna didn't respond. She read every line twice, saved the file, and archived it silently. Later that same evening, Ellie sent her a direct message with a tone far less formal and far more desperate. She wrote that the distribution plan didn't feel right, that it undervalued what Anna had endured as the middle child, but quickly pivoted to her own troubles. Raising a daughter alone, she said, was not just emotionally exhausting, but financially unsustainable. She wrote that her daughter's future was a shared responsibility, and ended the message with a casual sentence that barely hid its true purpose. Just something to think about if you ever consider adjusting that percentage. Anna read it all without emotion, then took a screenshot and filed it under a private folder labeled Documented Intent. Her father was next. He didn't bother with emails or texts. Instead, he requested a meeting over coffee. At the small cafe near the river, he brought with him a manila envelope containing a draft of a trust. The terms were clear. All assets, including the winnings, would be placed under a managed family trust, overseen by him. It was, he explained, a practical way to avoid costly mistakes and keep things from spiraling. He called it a safety net. Anna called it what it was: control wrapped in a velvet glove. She listened, nodded politely, and tucked the document away in her bag. 2 days later, Mark showed up at her apartment unannounced, accompanied by a man in a navy suit who introduced himself as a financial consultant. Mark insisted the meeting was informal, a simple conversation to help clarify options. The man asked casual but targeted questions, referencing tax brackets and structured settlements. At one point, he slid a thin folder across the table. Inside was a short contract, less than 4 pages, stating that Anna would temporarily assign her claim to the lottery winnings to a family advisory group for strategic distribution. It even included a signature line, pre-filled with her name. Anna held the pen briefly, pretending to read the terms for the first time. She made small, thoughtful noises and asked 1 or 2 questions that sounded sincere. Mark leaned forward, eager, already assuming agreement. But Anna set the pen down without signing, offering a vague excuse about needing more time. What none of them knew was that every conversation had been recorded, every document copied, every word preserved. Her laptop was filled with folders named by date and topic, audio files cataloged in order, screenshots stored in the cloud. She hadn't confronted them, hadn't pushed back, hadn't broken her role for a single second. But the evidence was growing, line by line, voice by voice. They believed they were building a structure of entitlement around her, gently nudging her into a corner from which they would divide the spoils. What they were actually doing was offering her the perfect view of their own unraveling. And Anna watched, silent and steady, while the house of cards assembled itself. On the following Sunday evening, Anna's apartment looked nothing like it had in weeks prior. The soft disarray of her artist's life was replaced with deliberate elegance. The large wooden table, once cluttered with sketchbooks and paint jars, was transformed into a candlelit banquet setting. Linen napkins, porcelain plates, sparkling cutlery, each detail chosen with care. There were fresh flowers in vases, jazz music playing softly in the background, and a warm scent of roasted herbs wafting from the kitchen. The meal was a 3-course showcase of Anna's recent lessons from a local culinary school. Herbed goat cheese tartlets, saffron risotto with seared scallops, and chocolate mousse with raspberry glaze. On the sideboard sat a chilled bottle of champagne, and in the center of the table, a cake with elegantly piped words, "Thank you for your support, family." Her guests arrived promptly. Her mother wore pearls and a rigid smile. Her father came with a bottle of wine he had once deemed too good for casual dinners. Ellie arrived in a new dress with her daughter in tow, and Mark came in his usual blazer, already scanning the room with a calculating eye. They sat, ate, and laughed with the performative ease of people playing roles they didn't quite believe in. Compliments flowed easily. Her mother praised the food, Ellie shared anecdotes about her daughter's art progress, and Mark made vague references to what comes next in a tone that suggested he was already part of it. After dessert, Anna rose from her seat slowly, holding a champagne flute in one hand. She spoke calmly, warmly, with the steady cadence of someone delivering a farewell speech. She thanked them all for their advice, for their thoughtful emails and generous offers. She said she was touched by their concern and amazed at how quickly the family had rallied around her. Her voice carried no irony. Her expression was serene. Then she turned to the small projector she had placed discreetly on a shelf behind her. With a click, the lights dimmed, and the first image appeared on the wall, a screenshot of her mother's email, highlighting the line proposing a redistribution of wealth and the footnote suggesting shared family priorities. The next slide showed Ellie's private message, carefully time-stamped, outlining her belief that Anna keeping the full amount was emotionally short-sighted. After that came the audio recordings, her father's clipped voice recommending the trust, Mark explaining why control structures were best for everyone. The voices were clear, undeniable, and played one after another in an eerie symphony of entitlement. Then came the spreadsheets, color-coded diagrams showing how the fictional winnings would be divided. Her name was always last. Her portion, always conditional. One slide included annotations of how many times the word fairness had been used in each document, highlighted in red for emphasis. The final slide was simple, a high-resolution image of the lottery ticket she had posted online, now with a translucent watermark across it reading "Sample Not Redeemable." For a moment, there was only silence. The kind of silence that fills courtrooms before verdicts or hospital rooms after diagnoses. Her mother's face went pale, her hand still resting lightly on the stem of her glass. Ellie looked down at her lap, blinking quickly, whispering something no one heard. Mark stood abruptly, knocking over his chair in the process. Her father reached for his napkin, as if trying to clean a mess that wasn't physical. No one spoke first, no one knew how. Their roles had evaporated, their masks fallen. What remained was a room full of people caught in the act of becoming villains in someone else's story. Anna remained standing, still and composed, as if she had simply shared a slideshow from a recent vacation. No shouting followed, no apologies, just an awkward scuffle of chairs, muttered goodbyes, and a shuffle of footsteps heading for the door. Within minutes, the room was empty. The cake sat untouched, its message glowing gently under the dim lights. Anna finished her champagne in silence. The performance was over. The stage was hers again. In the days that followed the dinner, Anna's phone remained quiet. No apologies arrived, no messages demanding explanations, not even a feigned attempt at reconciliation. The silence was not unexpected. It was simply confirmation. She opened her contacts list one morning and began deleting names. Her mother, her father, her siblings. One by one, she erased the digital reminders of a bond that had never truly existed. There was no ceremony to it, only quiet resolution. 2 weeks later, she signed the lease for a small sunlit studio in a converted warehouse near the harbor. The space had exposed brick walls, large industrial windows, and enough room to hang entire series of her work. It was a place she had dreamt of for years, but always considered out of reach. The rent was manageable, thanks to a grant she had been awarded the previous year, a juried prize for emerging illustrators exploring identity and personal narrative. She had never told her family about it. Back then, it hadn't seemed worth mentioning. Now, that money became the beginning of something entirely her own. No strings, no justifications, just earned freedom. She painted during the day, often with the windows open, letting the smell of sea air mix with turpentine and ink. At night, she worked on a new collection, one she had been too afraid to start before. It wasn't about trauma or revenge or even family. It was about light and shadows, structure and collapse, the quiet rebuilding of things once thought lost. The people who entered her life now knew her not as a daughter, not as a disappointment, not as someone to fix or diminish. Her new circle, other artists from the building, gallery owners, independent clients, saw only the present version of her. To them, she was sharp-witted, methodical, occasionally private, but always kind. She lent brushes, hosted coffee mornings, gave feedback without ego. No one asked about her childhood, and she never offered the full story. What they saw was a woman building something deliberate from silence. A woman who had walked away from a structure designed to shrink her, and instead chose to inhabit a world she could shape with her own hands. There was no lottery. There never had been. But there had been something far rarer. The refusal to be used, the courage to start over, and the discipline to keep walking forward, alone, if necessary, but never small again.